Hello, I am now in your consciousness. Thank you very much for letting me in. And now that I'm here anyway, why don't I have an interesting conversation with somebody else, Professor Steven Laureys? So I will invite him in a minute. I hope that's okay for you. If not, please turn off the podcast now. And I think we will have an interesting conversation about the neuroscience of consciousness, about the science of meditation, and about how science can meet spirituality. But before I take the liberty of inviting somebody into your mind, let me first introduce him. Steven is a neurologist, and he is both a clinician and an academic researcher. His research involves altered states of consciousness and how consciousness is different in people with brain damage. He also studies the effect of meditation on the brain. For instance, he has put the famous Buddhist Matthieu Ricard under a brain scanner, and we will also go into that a bit more deeply. And he has also written a book. The name is The No-Nonsense Book on Meditation, and I read it myself, and I would really recommend you reading it as well. So, Steven, please come in this nice person's mind as well. So, what I want to start with is, what are we exactly, based on your point of view?
Well, the word exactly, of course, as a scientist, we will use very carefully, so I don't think we can claim we know what we are exactly. Of course, the result of these million years of evolution, and we are confronted to these big questions, and that is the kind of questions as a teenager I was asking myself. What am I doing here in this universe, and trying to understand and make sense of nature, and then our role therein, and how come we're actually asking these questions, which is the study of consciousness itself, our internal universe. And I'm very happy that now I'm still asking myself those kinds of questions. They remain extremely difficult to answer. I think it's one of the biggest mysteries science is confronted to. What's the origin of matter? Where do we come from? How life emerged, and how then consciousness emerged. So I think we shouldn't be too arrogant. Nobody truly can explain these big questions, yet a lot of scientific advancement has been made, but at one point still I think you can just marvel at how incredible it is and what it is like to be a human.
Yes, would you say that now, after years and years of asking yourself this question, you got closer to an answer, or maybe you got closer to satisfaction, which doesn't necessarily mean you got an answer?
Well, I think in science we make discoveries, we push the frontiers of our understanding, and I'm very happy with the team to contribute a little bit to that and identify consciousness networks in the brain, looking at the damaged brain and coma and anesthesia and sleep, and now also, as you said, meditation and hypnosis. But yet every discovery or every, when we think we make a contribution to science, of course there's many other questions, and it's just way more complex. And
it's a very broad question, of course. It's not a scientific question, who are we or what is consciousness. It's
yeah, but it's also a question that is worth asking, I think. It's a difficult question, and I also notice that maybe historically we have kind of censored ourselves, so we considered it a kind of taboo to ask these broad questions, and I think that's wrong. I think it's good that as a scientist, of course, we know a lot about very little. We're hyper specialists, and the reductionist approach of science to break things down and to look at smaller and smaller angle, and yet I think we should also keep an eye on the big perspective, and as scientists I think we also have a role to not just leave it to philosophers or religion to give meaning, I think maybe we've neglected that a little bit. So it's trying to find that balance, not to think, okay, I'm a scientist, I can understand everything and be a bit arrogant. Also not just have this, I think, historical view where we looked at it and it was all magical. We had this magic thinking, and I'm very happy that science has improved the quality of life, our life expectancy, and I'm naively optimistic in how science and technology is really helping us. But I do think your question is important, and maybe as a scientist we should ask ourselves more often, what is the bigger picture?
Yeah, I think religion, like let's take Buddhism for example, they are already asking the question of who or what are we, how come we are conscious of being conscious. They're asking themselves the question for a long time, and maybe science is just getting up to speed the last 10 years.
I don't know. I think there's Buddhism, and of course there's a long tradition in asking questions about consciousness and mental activities, and other religions also, I think, try to tackle these big questions. I now, since the book, the no-nonsense meditation book, since I wrote that book, I had a lot of feedback from also Christians informing me that there is also within their Christian and then here in Belgium Catholic tradition scholars who were active in this field of Christian contemplative activities, and that was also for me rather a discovery. But I think all religions, Muslim friends, and there are Sufi traditions again. We see this, I think, all over the world. At any time, I think, man has been asking these challenging questions and been struggling. Now, one could say they're still kind of the same, and we kind of rediscover them. On the other hand, also, I do think that science and especially neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience, and now the technology, the machines, fMRI, and are helping us. But we are only, I think, scratching the surface. It's really a terribly complicated question, and we should tackle it with a very open mind. I think sometimes we, as scientists, we are supposed to be adogmatic, but we also have, and then on the other hand, we were supposed to have hypotheses, which are priors that are great but can also bias us. And then we shouldn't look at nature and wish it to be the way we want it to be.
Science is also a dogma in some way, that there's the scientific method, and either it agrees with the scientific method or it does not. Well,
yes,
of course it's a very scientific dogma. But,
Henri Poincaré said there is no dogma, and when thinking subjects itself to any form of authority or dogmatic thinking, you know, it's the end of the free scientific endeavor. I'm a strong believer in the scientific method. I would like to confront what I think I understand with what I think I measure. And of course, there are fields like consciousness or life or love that are hard to grasp. And so it's this kind of balance. I think, again, we shouldn't be too arrogant, but also I'm happy that we kind of understood some parts of, let's talk about love, and how we can be heartbroken, we can be depressed, we can be anxious. And so it's also good that we discovered these pills that help patients. Now, it's of course not the whole story, and sometimes we depend too much on these quick fixes that are just changing our
they're
chemistry.
A temporary relief, but then there's a new moment and it comes again and again. And
so it's again trying to keep this open mind, not accepting any truths as absolute. What is true today may be proven wrong tomorrow, and yet also remain critical. So in that sense, the scientific method is powerful because true scientists are really very critical. Also, they should be towards their own belief system, and it's a challenge. It needed big thinkers. We all know the big impact of someone like Einstein, who really had to think out of the box, be very creative, kind of put Newton aside and create
really
something
had
new.
To question the fundamentals.
And I think we need probably someone like that to tackle when you talk about who are we and how can we explain our sense of ego, of self-consciousness and perception, thoughts and emotions. Let's be honest, currently we simply don't understand these big questions, despite the big advances that have been made. And also not forget that science and the scientific method is being done by men. Well, women, men, with all their biases and priors and the confounding factors. So as long as we're aware of that, I think we're good. And then also we need to remain human, and we're not doing science the way a computer tackles a problem. We have emotions, we have values, we have motivation, frustration. We really perceive things, and a computer not. So the way we do science also maybe should take a little bit more into account that more not only rational part of the story. But still, in this modern world where we have these computers and robots and virtual realities and internet, and we are somehow, since the Industrial Revolution, kind of being disconnected from nature and put ourselves above the other animals. And I think now
we don't see ourselves as part of nature.
Exactly. So that's definitely wrong. I think that Descartes, with this mechanistic view of the universe and of other living forms, and putting man, especially the white male, on top and in the center of that, is wrong. And we still tend to do that, to see things from our own little perspective. The challenge for me now, in this time of climate change and huge challenges for our planet and ecology, with Silicon Valley investing in enhancing our capacities as human beings by looking at supercomputers and kind of upgrading, and some people dreaming of human 2.0. I think the challenge is to reconnect with nature, with the other living things, and that's why I like to discuss with people like Mathieu Ricard. You talked about Buddhism. Well, having spent the day with the Dalai Lama was very inspiring.
I can imagine.
And really, I think is a challenge to all of us. Actually, at one point or another, we hit these kind of existential questions.
Yes.
And then you can, because you mentioned it, take some drugs that make us hallucinate, or some increase our awareness or consciousness. I think that these are very powerful, but there's also a lot of other things one can do, that was also a personal discovery.
Yeah, like it seems that a lot of civilizations for ages and ages have been interested in discovering consciousness. Like in the Amazon, you have psychedelic drug plants, which they've been using for ages in a ceremony. It's something I've tried myself, and afterwards I had a feeling of, I'm such an annoying person and I'm nagging all the time, and I'm not always very grateful of the things right in front of me. And it was just accepting to myself that how wonderful it is that we are like this flow of experience that just happens, and it's here and we don't know why, we don't know where it comes from or where it goes to, and at one moment it can be gone, and that's it. It made me also realize, because of these mind enhancing, if I can call it, substances, like the brevity of that's what they say in Buddhism, the impermanence of everything. I think it's both something a bit maybe threatening, but at the same time it's maybe the one thing that gives everything value is that it's so temporary, and so.
Yeah, I think it would be a curse to live forever. We have difficulties accepting our mortality, and also religion has kind of all of them an answer for that. Of course, as a medical doctor, neurologist, being confronted with the team to people with severe brain damage in intensive care dying every day from traumatic brain injury, from cardiac arrest, from bleedings to the brain, we are confronted to this mortality.
You're confronted more than you would
frequently,
like.
and it does impact how you look to our life here on Earth.
Does meditation help to distance? Well, maybe distance yourself is not the right word, but let's say to have the mental capacity to deal with these events, like if a patient would die or.
Well, I think the challenge is for every person to find the things that help her or him. Meditation for me was very helpful for several reasons. Now it's a little bit like sport. You need to define what kind of meditation are you talking about. You can train attention, you can train empathy and emotions. Again, just as sport, you can start running and you will see the muscles in your legs grow stronger, or you can go to the gym and work your biceps, and it will be, of course, different depending on what specifically you do.
There's a huge variety of meditation. There you have transcendental meditation, but which basically keeps you out of the here and now a little bit, but then you have meditation.
My favorite is just focusing on my breathing. And I'm not a Zen master. In the book, I also try to explain that we shouldn't be too demanding, and some require you sit down and have 20 minutes or 2 times 20 minutes of this or that kind of meditation. I think we should maybe just try these different techniques and then enjoy the positive effects, and one does what one can. So I'm a husband, dad, doctor here in the hospital, and I lead a lab. So sometimes I just don't have 20 minutes in the morning because it's chaos. And so in the book I try to defend this idea of informal meditation. You can just, on this chair, we can do an exercise, and I can do it in my consultation between 2 patients or on the train or so it's kind of changing the habit of how the brain reacts and training these mental activities. So indeed, as you said, you have different forms. Focused attention is my favorite, on the breathing, and then you kind of observe these other thoughts and become aware of this monkey mind, thoughts always coming and going. But Mathieu Ricard's favorite meditation is compassion, loving kindness.
It's something that has helped me a lot with getting over past grievances, or thinking everybody just want to be happy and avoid suffering, so nothing really is ever very personal, and I think it helps. At first time it's hard, but after a while you can start wishing people happiness even though they hurted you quite badly.
Yeah, so but I think the challenge is maybe to invite the people listening to the podcast to maybe try one or the other exercise. There's transcendental, as you said, where you basically repeat a mantra. Actually, not so different from praying. You have these repeated sentences, and then
similar.
you kind of get into another state, but you can also just have this open presence and enjoy the here and now. So there's many different, in the book I try to give some very, very simple examples. If I can do it, anyone can do it. You also have the body scan. That is what my wife is doing a lot when she's got difficulty sleeping. Me, it's helping less. So I think the challenge is really to see, okay, depending on my needs, what is now helping me, what's making me feel good. And I personally don't like it when one kind of meditation is being presented as better than the others. Then I think
that's what I liked a lot about your book, is that you don't say this is how you meditate in this fashion this time per day, because it's quite ironic, because you just give yourself actually more stress. You just say
exactly,
you choose how you want, however you are made as an individual. So I like that a lot in your book.
Thank you, but I really think, and that's the reason I made the book, that maybe despite a lot of people talking about mindfulness meditation, and some see it as something just commercial or fashion now, I still see that we could invest more in our mental well-being, especially as a healthcare provider. I see that I never, during my university studies, nobody talked about meditation, and I'm supposed to take care of the other, but did I really learn to take care of myself? And many suffer from burnout in my profession. Two colleagues who committed suicide, which is terrible, and we know that for such a long time, and I think we don't do enough at the structural level. So I was in the parliament last week arguing that we should indeed pay more attention, also in schools where we have gymnastics, and we decided to have specific teachers for gymnastics, but we kind of, I think, ignore our mental well-being and emotional intelligence, and how to listen to our emotional states, and to communicate with and interact with others. I think we can do better, and maybe also could have specific teachers for this aspect, because today we hear so much again about computers and artificial intelligence, and you yourself, I understood, you are an expert in that field of these so-called intelligent computers. I don't think they're intelligent because they don't perceive anything.
It depends how you define intelligence.
But so to me, it's how intelligent can you be when you're unconscious? So I think we should be more attentive to what makes us human. Our brain is not binary. It has really it perceives things, and it can be motivated or not, or it can be frustrated, it can feel pain, it can love, and it can meditate, which is impossible for a computer.
It can meditate on its own existence, and I think that's computers are very far behind from that.
I fully agree. So we should, as a society, more invest with now, of course, the internet and virtual realities and screen time taking up a lot of our valuable time. And then again, we lose contact with nature, life, and just friends and family if we're not careful.
I think a lot of people, including myself, sometimes go through life as zombies. We have these automatic triggers, and we have cravings, and then you would probably say we have dopamine, and then we were happy for a little while again, and we go on and on. But then I think in the long term it makes us a bit dissociated with our feelings and the here and now, and I think it's very important. That's actually why I wanted to start this podcast, because I was traveling for a year, and I came back here and I was, where did I end up? Nobody was enjoying just bicycling to work, or just taking a moment to look at the sky, and I thought, maybe, well, I wouldn't say we're brainwashed, because that would think there's some evil people sitting around in a table discussing, but I think we sometimes are not in touch with ourselves, and we don't know what really matters and what doesn't.
That's a challenge, and we've been investing in acquiring knowledge when we are at school and we study, and now I think it's for many of us at one point or another we hit these existential questions, and maybe we could be a little bit more attentive.
Do you think it's a good question to ask yourself, how can I be happy? Because I see that a lot of people, they want to be happy, and it seems like a very hard thing to wish for yourself, because from an evolutionary perspective, I don't know if we are actually made to be happy. Like that's my opinion, but I think we should increase our capacity for suffering or just to deal with everyday life.
Well,
I don't know if happiness is a good goal.
Well, happiness wouldn't exist or be defined if there is not something different. You can call it suffering. I don't tend to not focus too much on suffering or other negative experiences, but indeed it is impossible to just be happy all the time. Life for all of us has ups and downs, and I think it's the challenge to deal with the moments when it's more difficult, and then indeed if we go for this golden grail or this absolute quest of happiness, we can become very unhappy, and
maybe partly social media is also to blame, because our expectations are so high because we always see other people's best moments in front of us.
Yeah, that's what studies show indeed. You're in Facebook and all these other platforms with happy people, the most beautiful pictures on Instagram, Pinterest, and you just feel your life is miserable. So again, I think the challenge is to use all these technologies in a positive way, and that's, I think, true for everything. You can use a knife as a surgeon to heal people, or you can kill someone with that same knife. So we're not going to ban knives, but let's think how to make good use of all of these, novel discoveries for us now with social media. But it was the same discussion when we had the radio, television. Yeah. We thought this is the end, nobody's going to read, and you can watch television or now Netflix and learn a lot and wonderful documentaries. So you can watch neurotoxic programs, and that's your choice. So the challenge for me is to make good use of it, and that I think is for a lot that we discovered, that we made. And I also like talking about Mathieu Ricard, his quite positive view on the capacities of humans to actually improve. And again, studies show that we are in a better condition now than 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and that I like. Now we hear a lot about the climate change and the big challenges, but I personally prefer people who have this optimistic view and talk about solutions. So I naively continue to try. Professionally, that means understanding consciousness and then translate it to better caring for the brain damaged and the mentally ill, or all these neuropsychiatric disorders. And then as a citizen, with all the challenges we see in our democracy, still also, despite what we hear and see in the news, well, actually, overall, it's a lot of positive things happening, and try to cultivate these. And then it's not just about this obsession of I want to be happy. Let's try to accept the ups and downs in life, and let's try to be good citizens and enjoy the happiness of making others happy.
Yes, I think there's a lot of value in that. Like if you have a miserable day, just make somebody else happy and you will see you probably feel a little bit better. You're obviously an expert on the brain, so can you pinpoint a so-called self inside the brain and say there's the self, or it's this networks, or it's this amount of action potentials in the brain?
So I think the honest answer is that it's a very difficult question. Some say it's impossible with our limited human mental brain capacity to ever solve this, and again, that maybe to me would be kind of dogmatic. Maybe it is too difficult, but maybe it isn't. And historically, very often we still tackled these big questions, and so I'm naively optimistic, but also not, I hope, too arrogant. We have not identified the self in the brain. I think that yes, there are networks, and the team contributed to these two networks. You have
the default mode network. I don't know how much that would contribute to the self, or
so we call this the internal awareness network. So that's critical for this little voice talking to yourself, permitting you to do mental imagery, to anticipate the future, but also to take into account your past memories. And then there's this external awareness network, and that is externally, front and the back. So this is a network. It's not one little part of the brain or one receptor, or it's two big networks. One making sense of external stimuli, what you hear and feel and see right now, and then this internal awareness, self, if you want. But again, we have difficulties defining these things. But truly, nobody understands how from this complex neural activity somehow emerge a thought. And there again, we maybe need a quantum leap, paradigm shift.
It's funny that you use the word quantum, because looking at quantum mechanics would probably give some philosophical, maybe even scientific insights into the self. Because I read the book from Mathieu Ricard, The Quantum and the Lotus, and I found it very interesting. How weirdly similar quantum mechanics and consciousness really is.
Yes, now quantum mechanics was truly proposed by man to explain the smallest and the subatomic functioning, and then also later explaining the biggest scale. But it's evidence-based, so it helped us to have a better model of the world as compared to Newtonian physics that work well in our daily lives. And so it's a big challenge, I think, to grasp all the consequences of quantum mechanics. And I'm not an expert in this field. We have physicists here who try to explain to me what could be the impact in these big questions in biology, life and consciousness. So far it has been difficult to see how quantum physics would or not help us to explain these big questions, and being experimentally verified. But it is clear that it's a good example of how careful we need to be, thinking that, okay, we had some laws, they explain it, this is the end of it. No, I think we still see throughout the sciences some very useful models and theories that help us to explain, to have this predictive power at a certain scale, and we have no unified theory that definitely for me would need to include not just quantum mechanics and gravity and classical physics, but also biology and consciousness and life. So
it's really 20 angles, or even more than 20, to answer a question like that.
Currently, it's definitely something that we are struggling with, and I think it's also something that during my lifetime I will not see solved. But that's, again, as we said in the beginning of the podcast, science gives us some answers, but it gives us way many more questions, and so we'll be busy for some time.
It's also what I thought with this podcast. I don't think I will have an answer, but it's just the asking the question and examining it that is the fruit of it. So
that's so wonderful. As a scientist, actually, we are like a kid looking at the world, just remaining curious, and step by step pushing the frontiers of our understanding. But actually also it's good that we remain very aware of our ignorance when looking at these very big questions you're dealing with. What is it we actually are, and why, and I think we become humble.
Yes, I think if there ever a real answer, I doubt it or not. I think just the process of examining it will let us come to the conclusion that maybe we don't matter that much as we think, and maybe we should think a bit more about other people and the world around us.
But you're very correct in emphasizing the importance of the approach, and maybe that's it. Life is not just about this straight line to happiness. It's the journey. So, well, I hope you enjoy your journey and finding meaning in all of it. And then I will go back to my team and try to
I will
inspire them in pushing the science of consciousness and translating it to the clinics.
Very cool research.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So this is unfortunately already the end of a very interesting 20 Angles podcast episode. I hope you got something out of it, and maybe it makes you question something in your life. And if you want more, then you should accept that feeling and not go into it. But if you do, and you really cannot accept the craving of wanting more episodes, you can simply go to 20angles.com and please share it with friends so I can keep on doing this.